Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the REALIFE Process podcast. My name is Teresa McCoy, and it is great to be back with you again this week. I am excited to have a guest on this week that doesn't feel like a guest. She's been with us several times on the podcast and works here on our team, and that is our marketing director, Lindsay Sterchi. So welcome back, Lindsay.
Hey, everybody. Good to be with you again.
Well, the reason I invited Lindsay back today is because Lindsay actually, since the first of the year, has kind of taken on a dual role here on our team, as she not only is serving as our marketing director, but she's also oversighting a brand new tool that is coming underneath the umbrella of the REALIFE Process called oneLife Maps. And we recently, probably 6 weeks or so, released a podcast. We'll reference it in the show notes about kind of the merge of these two things together, the REALIFE Process and oneLife Maps. But I wanted to invite Lindsay back specifically to our audience to talk about oneLife Maps. What are they? How do they align with the process? And so we're just going to dive into kind of exploring both of those things. So thanks, Lindsay, for helping us kind of figure this out and look at these two tools together.
Absolutely. Well, we've been so excited about just announcing this to you guys and having more tools and resources for you to use. But we thought it would be good to just talk about, why do these two tools work so well together? And so even as we do that, we thought it might be helpful to review for some of you. Maybe you're a new listener or just need a refresher on what is the REALIFE Process. So as we talk about these two tools of the process and the maps, just give us a brief overview, Teresa, of what is the REALIFE Process?
Sure, I'd love to. So as many of you know, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, back in November, we released my first book, Do What Matters, Live From Rest, Not Rush. And in that book, we actually go through the entire framework of the REALIFE Process. There's some of my backstory in there as well and how the process came to be. But we really unpack these 4 components, is what we call them, of creating a modern day rule of life. So these 4 components in this framework help you develop that. And we do it through some different things, just like the maps that you'll talk about in a bit are like that as well. So we do it through what we call real self-discovery. Then we dive into 90-day projects, is what we like to call them. So now that I know some things about myself, that real life being side of self, how do I want to move forward? How do I want to grow? How do I want to put together some projects to grow me in from my being to my doing? So 90-day projects. Then we also bring in the actionable part of the everyday ordinary life of time management. And underneath all that, and this is the segue, right, that we tie together the REALIFE Process and the maps, is underneath that really is spiritual practices, spiritual formation, and a sustainable life. That's why it's a rule of life. How do I want to sustain my life going forward? So in the process, we break that down into 4 components: real life being, real life action, real life time, and real life living. And if you were to see that visually, we often look at it as a triangle with those things with 3 arrows around the outside of it, talking about that idea that, you know, it is components that all fit together, yet they all stand alone, working from that being to doing. But underneath all of that is this idea of, this is God's design for us. This is God's design for our life, and we're discerning that with Him. We're discovering that with Him in partnership. That's what the rule of life definition is. We discern that and decide those things in partnership so that we can live it out in our everyday life. Romans 12:1 and 2 is kind of the life verse, not only for my life, but for our business. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your eating, sleeping, walking around life, and place that before God as an offering. That's the message version. And we see then this new tool that we are so excited and so proud to have on board under the umbrella of the REALIFE Process, we see the oneLife maps just really dovetailing right in with the real life process, especially in that spiritual formation side of things. So if you haven't checked out the real life process and just its framework, check it out, pick up the book, dive into those 4 components, putting together your rule of life and the way you want your life to be lived out. But then how would the maps come into play with the process?
Yeah, I think it's so helpful to hear the components of the process, because the real life process starts with your being. It starts with who you are and who God created you uniquely to be before you know how to live that out. And oneLife Maps uses a process that really allows you to go really deep into a process of self-discovery. And what it does is it uses these unique visual maps that allow you to explore your past, your present, and your future. So you explore your story, you look at where am I now and what is my unique design? And then what does that tell me about what God is inviting me to do to live that out in my future? And so you've got the maps that really take that internal, deeper look. And then when you partner that with the process that gives you a framework for how to live out who you are, that is a powerful combination.
It is.
And I love seeing how these 2 tools, we've used these with our coaches and our people and seeing how just the light bulb moments that go off when they take a deeper look into their story, into who God's created them to be. And it just provides such clarity in their action as they move forward.
And for myself, and I think this is important for you all to hear that are listening, the oneLife maps were a huge part of my story in actually putting together the process. So it's so interesting to go back now and have the opportunity and the privilege to carry this tool forward, because these maps have been such a part of how the process got shaped. I wanted to create and develop something that would be very accessible to people through the relay process, that would be kind of that, above the waterline piece of like, hey, I can take this and it's actionable. As a type 3 on the Enneagram, one of my favorite tools, I'm a very forward moving type. So when I created the process, I was like, yeah, I see so many people that get stuck in managing their calendar and their time and what they need to be working on. But gosh, it all needs to tie into their being and who they are, who God created and designed them to be. And then as part of the work that I did years ago too, being part of the Transforming Center with Ruth Haley Barton and the deep work I did there and learning about a rule of life. And I'm like, how can we modernize this a little bit? But yet in my story, the maps were such a huge piece of my own discovery. So they've always been there underneath. And now to kind of like, oh, they're back again and tie them back in is super exciting for me. But if you would, Lindsay, as you are working with this tool and you've had your own history with it, and we've talked about that on the previous podcasts we did with the oneLife Maps team, as you think about these tools and these actual visual maps, first of all, can you describe for me a little bit more, what's a visual map? Like what actually do these things look like?
The maps themselves are it's not just text and words on a page. It allows you to kind of paint a picture of what you see in your life. There's open space. There's visual kind of graphic elements on the map. There's space for you to not only write your own thoughts. It's a very tactical tool that you take a pen and write on. This isn't a digital thing. This is something that is very powerful to take a pen and actually in your own writing to put down your words. You can write, draw pictures on it or images or phrases, or you get to really make this map your own as you write all over it and just kind of get the thoughts out of your head and down on paper as you explore each of those different maps.
So you hear a very in the body experience too, which, we believe in waking up kind of all 3 centers, head, heart, and body. So many people have asked not only the oneLife Map team, but us as well, like, could you give us a digital printout? Could we do this as a fillable thing? And there's something about the experience of really slowing down I know for me, years ago, this was a whole part of learning how to live from rest, is to slow down and take the time to write or draw, use markers, colored pencils, whatever you'd like to do to capture, onto these 8 different visual maps. And each one of them is different. So when you go to the website and you check out onelifemaps.com, you'll see pictures of the maps. And they're kind of muted in tones. And I think that's purposeful in that, they're not like one color is dominating over the other or anything. They're very inviting and they're extra large in size. So it's not just a typical 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So you have plenty of room to work with the maps. So Lindsay, tell us, as we're looking at, there's 8 different ones, just kind of walk us through the process, because you mentioned looking at past, looking at present, and looking at the future. How does that process go?
So when you start with the maps, the first thing you look at is my life now. Because before we know where we want to go, we have to identify, where am I now? And so you name your current reality and circumstances in your life. Just take an overview of my life as it is right now. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you look at my life story. So that's where you explore your past. You document the events and experiences, what you experienced as a child, as a teenager, through adulthood, and just kind of looking at your life as a story and seeing, where have I come from to get to where I am now? And then after that, we look at some of our peak experiences. What are the times in your life that you felt most like you, that you felt most alive? And then some of the valleys, some of the times in your life that were hard, that places maybe that you need to either receive or extend forgiveness for things that happened in your life. Then we move into something that is very familiar with the real life process, which is reviewing our days. And this is a process of just kind of looking through your day and saying, where in my day did I move towards God or away from God? What happened in my day? And how is God moving in those moments? It's just an awareness of God's presence and activity through our days, which is something that we do in the real life process as well when we review our days and look at our lives. And then we look at our desires and our longings. So what are you feeling invited to in your life? What are you longing to see happen in your future? And then we look at some life-giving rhythms. These are the spiritual practice piece of that, of what are some things that you can do in your everyday normal life that will help you live out your life in a way that is true to who you've been designed to be, and that brings you closer to God. We talk about that it's God that does this work in us and through us. And so what are the practices that we want to put into place to help us live that out? And then finally, the last map is following forward. And this goes along with, we talk about a 90-day reset, getting up on the balcony of our life, taking into account all of this work that we've done through the maps and through the process, and saying, okay, what's next? What do I want to leave behind? What do I want to carry forward? And what might God be inviting me to in this next season of my life?
Thank you for walking us through those, because I think you can feel as you're listening that starting with your present, where am I now, looking a little bit in the past. And I will admit that the life story map is a difficult one, or a harder one to do. I shouldn't say difficult, harder one to do. It takes a little bit of time. And I always tell people, as you dive into that map, for some people, it's easier to start at the beginning, when, from birth through however old they are. And for others, it's easier to start current and work backwards. But just seeing those threads in that story are so important. And, of course, the peaks and valleys and all of that, you can hear that journey from present into past, back into maybe doing some more exploring there, but then eventually moving towards knowing all that I've discovered, knowing all that God has brought forward. I know for me personally, when I did my first set of maps, probably 10 years ago, there was a closure to some places in my story that felt good. Like, okay, I've wrote about that. I've kind of journaled about it. I've sat with God around some great questions. I've done some conversations with my spiritual director, my coach, all the people that I have in my team that really let me let that go. and be able to move into some of that. Okay, how do I want to live out my days now? How do I want to create this rule of life piece? How do I want to live into some different spiritual practices, rhythms, behaviors, routines? Those are some of the language we use in our definition of a modern day rule of life. So there's just such a going together, as I said earlier, just dovetailing of these two things. So let's talk a little bit, if we can, Lindsay, about where would people use the maps and how would they use the maps? How often? What's the application? Do they do this in a group setting? Is this an individual thing? Can you share with us kind of what we know about some best practices with the maps?
I think that the best way to experience the maps is in community. I think as you're discerning and discovering things about yourself, having a trusted group of people that you can bring that to and to work through that together is going to really make it a more powerful experience. You can do this on your own. And I think that starting with it, even as you go through in community, you start going through the map on your own and write out the insights and the things that you discover, and then bring that to community so you can grow together. So I would say start with this. If you're interested in this tool, start with it for yourself and see what it has for you and do that with community. But then also consider if these are tools that might be useful for you in the work that you do. So if you're a coach or a spiritual director, or if you lead in an organization or do speaking or training, that these are tools that can be used in a variety of settings. But I think it's same with the process, where we always say you have to do the work first yourself before you can invite others into it. But I know a lot of you listening are coaches, and I don't know if you've ever had a client where they know what to do. They know where they're stuck. Maybe they're struggling with time management or their calendar or wherever it is that they're stuck. And even if they know the tools to do to kind of address that, there's something else going on beneath the surface that is keeping them from moving forward. And so I feel like the maps are a tool that help you explore and uncover what is the deeper story here? What is going on beneath the surface that is keeping us from moving forward? And so I think especially as coaches, this is a tool that can help us unpack some of those deeper layers, first for ourselves and then with our clients.
I love that, because many times if you're in some type of helping profession, helping ministry of, a lay leader in a church or a spiritual director, coaches, whatever, if you're coming from that place, having another tool in your tool belt, that's often what we say that the process is. It's a framework that people can use for coaching and speaking and training and leading inside of organizations, because it gives people some common language and those types of things. The maps can really be that tool can help with that unstuck spot. For a client or someone you're working with, even a friend or a mentor or whatever, when they can take something and write it down for themselves first and then be able to share it with you. Right now, we are currently taking some of our coaches here at the REALIFE Process in a group community virtually through the maps, because it's a new tool for us and we're introducing them to it and having them experience it, like you said. And there is something about sharing from your story what you want to share that is so powerful, to do that in a way that's guided and directed. And part of the packet of the maps is actually a guide on how to do that, called three-way listening, and how do you show up well in community. So it's just a powerful tool. You can work through them on your own, but I would suggest that you find someone who will kind of listen to your story, whether that's with each and every map or at the end of the experience or any of those ways. So the process itself, our process, the REALIFE process, is a very, forward moving. I've got a framework, I'm moving forward. The maps give you those places to pause. So how often do you see, there's not right or wrong to this. I just wonder in our conversation, how often do you see somebody using the maps? Would it be used more than once?
Absolutely. I think especially there are certain maps that are very useful to do multiple times per year. I think of the My Life Now map, where you are saying, what are my circumstances? What is pressing right now? What's most important to me? That's something that even as with the process, we talk about this idea of a 90-day reset. And I think a map like that is incredibly impactful when you do it often and see where you are. The map reviewing my days, that could be used daily. Mm-hmm. You could use that every day or once a week or whatever rhythm worked for you. And I think even as, several of us are going through the maps again together, and even a map like My Life Story that doesn't necessarily change that often. It does change because we keep living life and adding to it, but there's a lot of it that we've already explored, but there's always deeper layers there. Every time I go through that map, there are new things that I notice. There are new connections that are made. And so I think even as we go through the maps and go back and review them, there's always more there to discover. Mm-hmm. There's always deeper layers. So I see this as a tool that is useful to not only go through all 8 maps together, but to revisit and do them again. And to bring that to community as well, because you learn from each other and can walk with each other through that.
It reminds me as we work with the process and we tell people, you set up your framework and you live it out in that first 90 days and you're like, okay, this is good. And then you we say, get up on the balcony every 90 days or so. We teach the practice of retreat or at least a day set aside. Maybe you're going somewhere a couple of times a year, that type of thing. That's how I see the maps. And that's where I've used the maps is sometimes during my 90-day reset is what we call it. I'm pulling out a map and doing it. It was interesting this time as our group of coaches is going through it to add another 5 years onto my life story map, which is the second map in the process, and adding those things on. And then that is the one that I keep adding to. The rest of them, I usually kind of redo a new map and then I date them. There's a place to date them and I keep those together. And it almost becomes like a journal that I have of, wow, last time I did the peaks map, this is what I had. And now this is what I have. What's the thread of the story there? Same thing with the story map. As I added on another 5 years, I'm like, oh, I need another map to do this on. I was able to look back in the story. And so I'm not a big everyday journal person. That's just not how I'm wired. I do some other things in practices around that type of exercise, but I don't usually write every day. But the maps have become somewhat of a journal for me as well. So on the back of the set of maps, there are just some really good, this experience would fit you well if. And I thought we might explore these just a little bit. We won't go through all of them, but if you're asking these kinds of questions, one of the questions that's on here is, I don't feel like I know myself anymore. If you're asking that question, or if you're asking, is there something more? Or maybe the question of you're seeking God in a deeper way and desiring to rediscover who you are through His eyes. So I wonder, Lindsay, as you've worked with the maps, what kind of questions have they helped you to answer and discover and be? I mean, there's several of them on here, but, understand the restlessness that you feel inside. What comes up for you as you've worked with the maps yourself personally?
I love the question even that it has of which way will lead me toward expressing more of who I am made to be. So when we're at that point of transition, I think for me, when I notice that the season of life is shifting as my kids get older, as my work life evolves and changes, there are things that we've done a certain way because that's how we've always done them. But we can experience this restlessness of going, is this really who I am? Is the life that I'm living expressing who God really created me to be? And so it's at those moments where there's a shift in season, there's a transition. And before I move forward and just assume I know what's next, to step back and say, who am I really? What has God been doing in my life story so far? What am I desiring? What are the longings that are stirring in me? And then what is the invitation for what's next?
That's good.
So instead of rushing ahead and assuming I know what I'm supposed to do next, I want to slow down and listen to my life and to what God might be showing me about what he's inviting me to.
Well, and that's, what I talked about in the book, Do What Matters, is how do I live from a place of rest and not from rush? Because so many times, the culture around us is just rush into the next thing. You've got this, this is how you should show up in this next season, whatever that might be. So as we kind of wrap up this conversation, I want to share kind of from two different places. And first of all, I want to really read for people what we call a modern day rule of life. I want to share what that definition is. And then I'd like for you to share these perspectives, these biblical perspectives that the maps bring. And I think we can tie this all up through these two things. So the definition that we have for a rule of life, a modern day rule of life, is a commitment to live your life in patterns of behaviors, rhythms, and routines. It is crafted through discernment in partnership with God as you consider the way God designed you, the values he's inscribed upon your heart. Once discovered and written, it serves as a tool and framework that can help you make decisions for your life and determine how to best order and align your days. And so you hear in that definition, and we've done podcasts about the rule of life. There's lots of resources on our podcast about the rule of life and breaking it all down. But as you hear that definition, you also feel that same movement that the maps have of, wow, let me slow down. Let me take some time to really look at my life, and then let me craft it from that place. But what I love about the maps is these 4 words that, again, are on the back of the maps. Would you mind kind of sharing with us, Lindsay, what those 4 key words are?
So what the maps help you do is to clarify, discern, understand, and decide. And so it's going to help you clarify your desires, what it is that you want, to discern how your life story impacts the way you live today and your choices for tomorrow. So if you're at a point of decision and discernment of what's next, these maps are going to help you do that. It helps you to understand yourself and your part in God's larger story. So that identity piece, that self-discovery, but also how who you are fits into the bigger picture of what God's doing. And then to decide what you might do to live a life that is a more full expression of who God created you to be. So how do I show up, knowing what I've learned about myself through this process of self-discovery? How do then I show up in the world? What action do I take? And how do I live?
And I'm having a little aha moment myself right here on the podcast as I realize that in the rule of life and in the maps are 2 words, discern and decide. So they're in both places as part of that process of, we talk about in the rule of life is it's crafted and discerned in partnership with God. And then from there, that Romans 12, 1 and 2, you can go out and decide how you're going to do today. And that's really what the maps are inviting you to also, is that discernment and then deciding factor as you feel that movement past, present, and future. So one of the things that, as we kind of wrap this up and tie this up, is we want to invite you to check out both things. And the reason is, there will be things from the process that will really resonate with you. Oh, here's a calendar. I know how to do that. And here's some time management and some breaking down into projects. And there will be some things from the maps that will really invite you to different places. And we know that not every tool speaks to every personality, speaks to every season of your life, and to everything. But we believe that these 2 tools together can really be a beautiful invitation into living from, a place of rest and not a place of rush, from living from discernment into decision making, from living into all these different seasons of life, and helping you to craft the life that you want to have and that you and God are creating together. So thanks, Lindsay, for being with us today and helping us take a deeper look at the maps. This is something we plan on doing as this tool becomes a part of the tools that we're bringing to the world. Is Lindsay will be joining us here on the podcast on a regular basis. We'll have some people from the oneLife Maps team. They have a team of people that have been stewarding this tool and creating this tool, Sybil, Sharon, Joan, and others that support this work. And so, we'll be having them on as well. So we can't wait to have you back. You'll be back soon.
Yes, it'll be good. I'm so excited for what these tools are going to bring to you all as you experience them and the power of these two tools together. So exciting.
So if you have exact questions, I would say this, you can always reach out to Lindsay at the REALIFE Process. If you're like, hey, I didn't even know what these were, but then we'll send you to two different places. And there's a couple places I'd like to send you today to check this out. One is onelifemaps.com. Just dive in. You can see things, you can see resources and all of that. And then the other place that I'd love to send you today is actually to the realifeprocess.com/book resources. And the reason I want you to send you there, that's actually a link that's in the back of the book that I've talked about. But I want to send you there because you can actually download one of the guidebook resources that we have that gives you a lot of our content. And it will give you this definition of the rule of life in there and let you see the process and all four components. It's, just a taste of what we have at the REALIFE Process. So we'll have those in the show notes, but the realifeprocess.com/book resources and then the oneLife Maps. Anywhere else, Lindsay, that we'd like to send them? Gosh, that's like a lot of rabbit trails to follow.
I think that's a great place to start.
Yes,
those two
I do too. So thanks again for being with me today. This has been a fun conversation.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Remember, every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. And we hope that these tools will help you to find those moments in your day. So we'll be back next week with more from the REALIFE Process podcast.